smart enemies in war zones. But I never thought I'd be fighting a battle in my own home, against the people I trusted most. 15 years in the military teaches you a lot about people. You learn to trust your team because your life often depends on it. You learn discipline, structure, and how to adapt to situations that don't always make sense. It's a brotherhood, a bond that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. For 15 years, I lived by a strict routine. Every day had a purpose, a mission, and I thought when I retired, I'd carry that same sense of order into my civilian life. I wanted peace, quiet, and a chance to finally build something for myself, something for Emma and me. A few years before I left the service, Emma and I bought a little house in the suburbs. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. I imagined mowing the lawn on Saturdays, grilling in the backyard, and maybe even starting a family when I leave the service. I was ready for that life, or at least I thought I was. The first few months of retirement felt different. I went from waking up at 5 a.m. for drills to sipping coffee on the porch at 9 a.m., wondering what to do with my day. To keep busy, I took up woodworking in the garage. Nothing fancy, just building shelves and fixing up old furniture. It kept my hands busy and my mind calm. Emma worked part-time at a local real estate office, and for the first time in years, we had time together. We'd sit down for dinner every evening, something I missed while I was deployed. Life wasn't perfect, but it felt like we were finally settling into a rhythm. But then, small things started bothering me. At first, it was easy to brush them off. I'd log into our joint bank account and notice that the balance seemed lower than it should have been. I thought maybe I'd forgotten about a bill or that Emma had paid for something big and didn't tell me. But the numbers didn't add up. I mentioned it to her casually one evening. "Hey, I noticed the account's looking a little light. Did we have some unexpected expenses?" She barely looked up from her phone and muttered something about groceries being more expensive lately. Groceries? I knew how much groceries cost. And even if she was right, there was no way it explained the steady drain I was seeing. I asked again a few days later, and that time, she got defensive. She told me not to worry about it, that she was handling it. But the way she said it felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something wasn't right. Then there was the phone. She was always on it, texting, scrolling, or just staring at it. If I walked into the room, she'd lower the screen or tilt it away. I started paying more attention. When her phone buzzed, she'd pick it up and step into another room to reply. I don't know if you've ever lived with someone and felt like they were there, but not really there. That's how it started to feel with Emma. Conversations became shorter. She started working late more often. And when she was home, it felt like she was always somewhere else. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I was struggling to adjust to civilian life and looking for problems where there weren't any. But deep down, I wonder if this is how things would be going forward. It was just another Wednesday morning. I was sitting at the dining table with my coffee when the post arrived. Bills, advertisements, the usual junk. But tucked between it all was an envelope from the bank. I almost didn't open it right away. I mean, it was probably just another account statement. Nothing urgent. But when I did, my stomach dropped. The letter said there was a loan, taken against our house, a year before I retired. A year. It detailed payment schedules and balances that didn't make sense. At first, I thought, this has to be a mistake. I mean, a mix-up at the bank or some clerical error, right? I kept rereading it, trying to make sense of it. My name was all over the document, but I had no memory of signing for any loan. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Questions kept hitting me like punches. Why didn't I know about this? Who took out this loan? Why wasn't I informed? And then it hit me, this wasn't a mistake. No, this was deliberate. At first, I stayed calm. Years in the military train you to do that. You don't panic when you hear gunfire. You assess the situation. You focus on the facts. But as I pieced together the little clues, I could feel that calm start to crack. There was no way I could have forgotten something as big as signing for a loan against our home. And if I didn't do it, who did? I sat back in my chair, the letter crumpled in my hand. My mind flashed to Emma, my wife of 10 years. The woman I trusted with everything. She'd been acting different lately, always on her phone. And then there were the vague excuses about unexpected expenses when I'd asked about the thinning bank account. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just imagining things. But now, I have a feeling that something is wrong. In combat, you learn to trust your instinct. It's what keeps you alive. And right now it was telling me that I couldn't just sit back and ignore this. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't confront Emma. Not yet. If I walked up to her with this letter in hand, she'd probably say something vague, something I couldn't pin down. I wasn't going to give her the chance to dodge the truth. Not this time. Instead, I made a decision. I was going to find out the facts first. The whole picture. No accusations, no shouting matches, just cold, hard evidence. I put the letter in my desk drawer and locked it away. That was step one. I didn't want Emma stumbling across it and figuring out what I knew. And then I started planning my next move. I began my investigation one night. When the house was quiet and Emma was fast asleep, I pulled out my laptop and started going through our bank statements. At first, it was the little things that caught my eye. Transfers I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, pound 200 here, 500 pounds there. But then they got bigger. Thousands disappearing into an account I'd never seen before. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe Emma had set up a savings account without telling me, or maybe it was some kind of billing mistake. But as I scrolled further back through the months, I realized this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. The transactions were all too consistent. The same account number kept popping up, like breadcrumbs, leading me straight to the truth. I didn't recognize the name on the account at first, so I looked it up. And that's when it hit me hard. The account belonged to Kevin, Emma's brother. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen. Kevin. I couldn't wrap my head around it. But the worst was yet to come. I kept digging, piecing together the puzzle. And it didn't take long before I stumbled across the loan documents for the house. At first glance, they looked fine until I saw the signature. My name scrawled across the bottom of the page, but it wasn't my handwriting. My stomach turned. They forged my signature. They took out a second mortgage on the house, my house, without me knowing. And for what? To bail out Kevin's sinking businesses and pay off his personal debts? The more I read, the angrier I got. The money wasn't just gone. It was burned up in a fire Kevin started with his reckless decisions. And Emma? She wasn't just complicit. She was an active part of it. I'd faced betrayal before, but this wasn't some distant enemy or a combat zone I could mentally detach from. This was my wife, my family, the people I trusted most. And the worst part? I couldn't just lash out or confront them. If I did, they'd probably find a way to cover their tracks, and I'd lose any chance I had of proving what they'd done. So I did what I'd been trained to do. I pushed the anger down, buried it deep, and focused on what needed to be done. I knew I needed help. This wasn't something I could tackle alone. The next morning, I found a lawyer who specialized in fraud cases. Sitting across from him in his small, cluttered office, I laid out what I had: the bank statements, the transfer records, and my suspicions about the forged loan. He listened carefully, then leaned back in his chair. "Ryan," he said, "you've got something here, but you need more. The courts won't act on suspicions. You need hard evidence, proof of the forgery, a clear money trail, and anything that shows their intent." I nodded. I wasn't expecting a quick win. If anything, that conversation solidified what I already knew. This was going to be a long fight, and I needed to stay sharp. The forged loan was my next target. I pulled out the loan documents and stared at my supposed signature. It was close, but not close enough. There were small inconsistencies, tiny details someone unfamiliar with my handwriting might miss. I took the documents to a handwriting expert. Watching her work was fascinating. She explained how forgery could be detected by analyzing pressure points, strokes, and patterns. By the end of her analysis, I had a detailed report stating with absolute certainty that the signature wasn't mine. This was the first major piece of the puzzle, and it felt like progress. I still needed more direct evidence of their involvement. That's when I turned my attention to Emma's phone. I knew the answers I needed were likely on there. She was careful, though. Her phone was always locked, and she rarely left it unattended. It took almost a month of observing before I got my chance. She left her phone on the kitchen counter while stepping out to get something from the store. My heart was pounding as I grabbed it, knowing I had only seconds. I went straight to her chats with Kevin. What I saw confirmed everything. They were discussing me, how to handle Ryan if I caught on. They talked about their plans to siphon more money, and even joked about how clueless I was. I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak reading those messages. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to see it spelled out in black and white. I took screenshots and forwarded them to my number, then deleted the images from my wife's phone. The final piece of the puzzle came from a public records search. I looked into Kevin's businesses. I knew he'd been struggling, but I didn't realize how bad it was. The guy was drowning in debt. Multiple failed ventures, unpaid loans, and lawsuits piling up against him. Suddenly, everything made sense. He wasn't just desperate, he was sinking, and he was dragging Emma into the abyss with him. By the time I pieced everything together, I wasn't the same man I'd been when this started. I was a husband betrayed, a man fighting to take back control of his future. After I showed my lawyer the new evidence I got, he leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and gave it to me straight. Ryan, what they've done isn't just unethical. It's illegal. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement, this is serious. Patrick, my lawyer, outlined the plan step by step, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining some control. He explained that we'd filed 2 cases, a criminal case for the forgery and fraud, and a civil case to recover the money they'd stolen. The goal wasn't just to expose them, it was to make sure they faced real consequences. I nodded. Filing the charges was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every time I handed over a piece of evidence to Patrick, it felt like I was peeling back a layer of betrayal. Patrick reassured me that the evidence was solid. Once the charges were filed, there was no going back. Living with Emma during those weeks was like living with a stranger. She went about her day as if nothing was wrong, smiling, chatting, even asking me what I wanted for dinner. It was almost surreal. I'd sit across from her at the table, listening to her talk about managing the household expenses, while I knew exactly what she and Kevin had done. The hardest part was keeping my composure. Every time I looked at her, I had to remind myself not to give anything away. So, I played my part. I acted like nothing had changed, even when it felt like the weight of the betrayal was crushing me. I smiled when I needed to, nodded along when Emma talked, and pretended everything was fine. It wasn't easy, but it worked. Emma and Kevin had no idea what was coming. I didn't sleep much during those weeks, but I didn't care. Every sleepless night brought me closer to the truth coming out. And when it did, I knew it would be worth every second of the wait. It had been weeks since I filed the case. I hadn't spoken to Emma or Kevin since then, not a single word. When the summons was served, I packed a bag and left the house. I couldn't stomach staying there with her any longer, not after everything I'd uncovered. But sitting in that courtroom, seeing them again for the first time, I could tell they didn't expect me to actually go through with it. Emma's face was pale, her usual confidence replaced by nervous glances at her lawyer. Kevin just sat there, stiff and silent, trying to act like he wasn't scared. But I knew better. My lawyer started by presenting the bank records. Line by line, he walked the court through every transfer. Thousands of pounds drained from our joint account and sent directly to Kevin's. There was no denying it. The numbers didn't lie. Then came the forensic analysis. The handwriting expert took the stand, explaining in detail how Emma had forged my signature to take out the second mortgage on our home. I watched Emma out of the corner of my eye. She wouldn't look up. She just stared down at the table, probably hoping it would all go away. And then the screenshots. My lawyer held up printouts of every message between Emma and Kevin. He read them aloud for everyone to hear. Plans to handle me, mocking me for being too trusting. One of Kevin's messages even said, "Don't worry. He'll never figure it out. He's too focused on his military stuff to see what's happening." I don't know if they realized how much those words cut. I had trusted these people, trusted them with my life. And all the while, they'd been laughing behind my back. By the time my lawyer finished presenting the evidence, their defense had completely fallen apart. Their lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, but even he didn't sound convinced. Kevin was sweating bullets, tugging at his collar, while Emma sat frozen, like she was finally realizing there was no way out. I didn't say a word the entire time. I just sat there, watching, listening. When the judge finally ruled, it was like a weight I didn't realize I was carrying had been lifted. Kevin was convicted of fraud and forgery. He got a prison sentence, I think it was 3 years. Not long enough if you ask me, but it was something. Emma didn't escape either. The court ordered her to pay restitution. She'd have to repay every penny she helped steal from me. Of course, she didn't have the money to do that. But the ruling meant her wages would be garnished until the debt was paid. And the mortgage they'd taken out in my name? The court invalidated it, which meant my home was safe again. No more threats of foreclosure. No more sleepless nights wondering if I'd lose the roof over my head. Kevin's businesses? Bankrupt. He'd been using the money they stole from me to keep them afloat, and without it they crumbled. I heard later that he tried to borrow from other family members, but no one wanted anything to do with him after what came out in court. After the ruling, Emma tried to talk to me. She cornered me outside the courthouse, tears streaming down her face. "Ryan," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I was desperate. Kevin convinced me. He said we'd pay it all back once his business turned around. Please, I didn't mean for it to go this far." I looked at her, and for a second I almost believed her. But then I remembered those messages, that signature she'd faked, and all the lies she'd told me over the months. "Emma," I said, my voice calm, "I gave you everything. My trust, my love, my life. And you gambled it away. We're done." I filed for divorce the next day. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. She made her choices, and now I was making mine. Looking back, I'm not proud of how long it took me to see the truth, but I am proud of how I handled it once I did. I didn't lose my temper. I didn't stoop to their level. I fought back the only way I knew how, with focus, discipline, and a plan. People say revenge is sweet, but I don't think that's true. Justice, though? Justice is satisfying. Justice is the moment you realize you've taken back control of your life. And for me, justice meant walking out of that courthouse with my head held high, leaving Emma and Kevin to deal with the mess they'd made. Before you leave, I want to take a moment and ask you something. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Imagine finding out that the two people you trusted most, your wife and your brother-in-law, were the ones stealing from you, lying to your face every single day. How would you handle that? Would you confront them right away? Would you try to forgive them? Or would you do what I did and build your case piece by piece, so that when the time came, they couldn't escape the truth? I'm not here to tell you how to live your life or how to handle betrayal like this. But what I can tell you is that nobody deserves to be taken advantage of, especially by the people you thought had your back. So, here's what I'd like from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done? And if this story resonates with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe it's a friend, a sibling, or someone going through a tough time right now. Sometimes, just knowing you're not alone can make all the difference. And trust me when I say this, the truth always comes out, no matter how well they try to hide it.